Thank you so much for joining us on this hot topic, overspoken, overconfused, over-deliberated concept of Gen Z and what it takes to keep them in the workplace. And so this is going to be a webinar that covers two practices of trust-based leadership that will facilitate not only Gen Z retention, but maximizing their talent and their contributions and their unique worldview of what it should be, what employment should be about, what leadership should look like, and what workplace practices should be structured by. So before we get into this hot topic, I want to introduce myself. Many of you may not know me. I have just started my consultancy firm called Results of Kindness, and we focus on embedding kindness into the infrastructure of organizations. So we're not so much coaches, we're not so much trainers, but we are the thinking and the systems behind trust-based leadership, talent retention cultures, and at the center of it, emotional integrity, kindness, and what Radical Edge is all about, emotional intelligence as well. And our focus is to redefine kindness, not as a soft skill, but as infrastructure, as a systemized approach to long-term retention, productivity, and profitability. And the way to do that is to lead a global movement, not just face-to-face or in one-to-one sessions, but to essentially change the way that we do business altogether, starting with trust, which we believe is the basis of leadership, is the basis of retaining difficult Gen Z. So, as we said, who we are, and really the focus of today and the insights that we have brought today, it comes from the programs that we have created that is all about ethical clarity, psychological safety, and structural clarity for talent retention. And as I said, we are going to be focusing on two strategies for Gen Z retention. Number one is flexible work patterns and performance reviews that are not based on outcomes or the time served in a workplace, but on results and on the impact that the individual has made during their time in an organization. And we believe that these aren't just attractive possibilities, the new fad, something that we talk about in a shiny business article, but we don't take on, but very much the essentials for leadership, management, and talent retention of the future. And this is part of a broader program that we provide. This is just essentially the outer shell of the deep approach that we have to talent retention that touches on all levels, strategic, management, and environmental. But these foundational strategies will help your organization steer towards a more robust understanding of what it takes to retain Gen Z. So, understanding Gen Z, there's a lot that is spoken about us. We are branded as difficult, sometimes lazy, we can't be kept, we won't be kept, etc. But let's try to understand Gen Z as who they are, not what they are branded to be in the workplace, coming from a Gen Z founder herself. So, Gen Z's 5 core values in the workplace. Now, we are growing up in an era of knowledge retention, of the surplus of information, and more than anything, we are now searching for human connection, growth, and transformation within workplaces. Now, the baby boomer generation very much believed that work should be something that is in exchange for a living. It's in exchange for keeping a livelihood. But Gen Z want work to matter more than just a paycheck. And this is very much reflected in the surveys and the statistics that are coming out of what Gen Z want in the workplace. And this is what, as a collective, their core values are at work. So transparency, talking about inclusion, talking about diversity, showing or performing kind or empathic leadership doesn't work for a generation that knows about self-love, self-boundaries, and very much rooted in psychological education and self-discovery. They ultimately want the real thing, autonomy. Now, there's a concept or an understanding or almost a compromise that we experience when we go to work. We have to give up some part of our personhood in exchange for being a part of that organization. Gen Z believe very much that they want to retain their personhood while also contributing to an organization and growth. So in an era or a generation that is almost obsessed with personal development, they want work to be transformational. They want to come into workplaces that change them, that shape them, that help them learn, and not just as a means to live and not merely as a paycheck they can take home. And number 4, creativity. Now, the interesting thing is that the average Gen Z person has 2 or 3 side hustles or interests. We've monetized pottery, dancing on TikTok, poetry. We've monetized a lot. And it shows us that the reality that a human being is not just their job title. They are a collective of many, many different facets of their personalities. And they want to bring that creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurial spirit to work as well. And of course, underlying all of these values is purpose. They crave meaningful work over a mere paycheck. So these are just some of an overview of some of the statistical insights that show us what Gen Z want when they enter the workplace and essentially what keeps them. So access to mental health, genuine support and leadership, high trust and high integrity, and alignment with their values when they're searching for a job. So the character of the company is going to matter just as much as the salary and the job title and experience alignment too. So to help us think about why and how we can implement flexible working patterns, we also have to understand where the necessity comes from. So flexible work options are massive for Gen Z because they believe in work-life balance. And that reflects in their expectation for employers to take a stance on social justice. If your employer does not see you as a whole person, they're not likely to take on matters of importance in social justice as well. And of course, mental health. So flexible work options, when we explore that, let's think about social justice. Let's think about the perks and the mental health benefits that flexible work options bring and why Gen Z are requiring their leaders to focus so much in this area. So, as we said, we don't want just a job, we want to matter. So, when we think about trust-based leadership, we have to understand what that is to begin with. And it's very much a new concept. But really, the pillar and the post of trust-based leadership is emotional intelligence, strategic trust. So it's not just about trusting individuals to go and do what they think that is right to do. There is support there. There's a strategy there. But ultimately, there's room to breathe and room to think. And what that does is it moves us from micromanagement to self-accountability. We're not here to baby or micromanage employees. We're here to help them grow. And ultimately, the more self-trust and the more self-accountability employees have, the more they uniquely and independently contribute to company growth, profitability, and productivity. When we loosen our hand just a little bit with a structured approach, fantastic things happen. And one of the great things is a 27% increase in retention when we foster psychological safety alongside strategy. So how do we do that? How do we maximize and retain Gen Z talent? Flexible work patterns. Now, there is this myth that was that the 9 to 5 concept has been developed on, and that is that creativity and productivity are linear, when actually productivity and creativity for most people comes in bursts of time and through inspiration, rather than being a consistent pattern of output. So, and this we can see in the statistics and also in the popularity of the 4-day work week that, for example, the Sharjah government have piloted and found that not only is it creating exponential organizational results, such as increased job satisfaction, higher productivity, and improved mental health, but most interestingly, they saw an increase in interpersonal relationship effectiveness. People were happier. There were less arguments and fights on the streets, and crime rates decreased as well. So when we bring in flexibility and when we place work-life balance at the center of workplaces, we don't just see an organizational impact, but interestingly, we see a social impact as well. Now, another thing that 9 to 5 structures also mask is not only the illusion of productivity, but what they are actually measuring. And it's not real output, it's presenteeism. It's about the time served. It's about the impression of impact rather than actual output. So what does that do? When we focus on presenteeism, when we focus on the appearance of productivity, not only do we lose money, but we also impact the psychological well-being of employees who feel like not only do they have to perform, but they also have to be appearing to perform at all times. And that's why Gen Z have learned from their parents, they've learned from the generations before them, and have realized that what they want more than anything is flexibility, because that allows them to make real impact. So that's why 75% of Gen Z believe and have been testament to the fact that this increases productivity. This helps to not only help organizations save money, but it also allows for better output, creativity, competitiveness, and also customer retention. So this is a case study that I was really excited to share because it was something that was not so much a part of our core services, but something that we developed after a consulting session with a client. And one of our clients said that I have a stellar, high-performing employee, but she says, and I quote, "My brain doesn't stop working until midday." And she was really contemplating her future in this organization because they did not have the trust or the courage or all the means to be able to systematically implement flexible working patterns. And so we said, let's give her a 2-month pilot project where we will essentially divide her day into 2, and then you can see how this works for her productivity and her retention, and also whether she wants to continue in this company as well, because they didn't want to lose her, but they also found that her creativity came from her out of work hours rather than in work hours. And we see that a lot with highly intelligent employees, and these are the ones that we want to keep. And therefore we owe them a little bit of a playful, productive, creative approach to how we structure their work. So we did the pilot project, and what we did was we split her day into 2 parts. So admin, check-ins and meetings, she had about 2 hours in the morning, core hours, where this allowed her to be filled in with updates, with expectations, and with anything that was urgent or pressing. So the admin was out of the way and she was still kept in the loop. And then we allocated her project building, her creativity, her maximum output hours into the evening. And we ensured that this was structured with a support check-in from a senior member of staff within the 9 to 5 rhythm to ensure that she wasn't being surveyed, she wasn't being looked at as, let's just see how you're getting on, are you doing the work, but how can we support you? So we gave her that flexibility. And within 2 months, her productivity and her output and her creativity doubled. So this very small case study, and then we went on to inspire them to take on the 4-day work week or the split work pattern for the next 6 months. And that's something that we are in conversation with them at the moment, because it worked so brilliantly for this one employee. And so my advice is that if you're not ready to take the plunge, start with pilot teams and approach it with openness and approach it with some level of trust, also aligned with a structure and accountability in place, so that you don't feel as if your productivity levels could go could stoop if you don't have that surveillance and that structure in place. And introduce core hours with optional flex slots. So as we did, we had the check-in, we had the admin, we had the core hours in which we ensured that she was filled in the loop. But then we introduced the concept of flexible working pattern slots, where she chose, and she gave her the rest of her hours, which was 8 hours. And she did the work wonderfully. And it was at a time that worked for her. And of course, offer support check-ins without surveillance. And when you come in from a place of trust and with the lineage of the status quo, it can be very psychologically understandable as to why this may seem like a massive undertaking. So start with a pilot team project, start with one employee and see how that works for you. But really the data and Gen Z's workplace requirements and the case studies that we've mentioned today show very much that flexible work patterns that work for individuals could mean a lot more productivity, profitability, and retention for your organization in the long term. So it's about open-mindedness and a measured approach to this new phenomena. And then we've got the second technique, the second way of ensuring high levels of Gen Z retention. Now, as we said before, one thing that Gen Z absolutely love, they love the space to think, they love the space to explore, and they want to be part of something that's greater than them. They don't want to just be part of filling in time. They want to make impact. They want to make that contribution through the originality and the self-reflection activities that they're already undertaking in their personal time, and that organizations can very much benefit from. So when we think of performance reviews, we think of a lot of fear, very outdated, very performative. It's about showing that you've been productive at all times, of all places, of all moods, of all days. And in reality, if I was to ask you to reflect, how true is that for you? Is it possible that a person, the moment they clock in, from the moment they clock out, from month 1 to month 11, is it possible that there is such high and sustained levels of productivity in terms of output? No. And what that does is it takes away from the quality of outcomes. So this is a new approach. This is one that's less interrogative and more cooperative. And that's why a lot of the time in the first year, performance reviews are poor, because people are being required to perform and to succeed on day one without the support and without the space for cooperative two-way learning between senior staff and employees. And therefore, we believe very much at Results of Kindness that implementing regular, growth-focused, collaborative check-ins that emphasizes coaching. Gen Z absolutely love the idea of coaching leadership rather than top-down dictatorial leadership. That will create the space for self-reflection, will inevitably help performance in the long run, rather than merely masking the appearance of it. So some of the statistics: 66% of Gen Z prefer ongoing feedback to annual reviews. And it's almost the same thing as an individual needs to be replenished and renewed and reminded of growth on a daily basis, rather than at the end of the year. They forget. They may not have had the time, the opportunity, the support to improve. And isn't that what companies should be aiming for anyway? The more we enable and facilitate growth in employees, the more we grow as a company, as an entity, and as a brand. And the science says that 79% say that regular feedback improves engagement. The more chance and the more grace we give to employees, the more likely they are to engage and improve. So what does that look like as a guideline? So, of course, this is the outer shell, and this is very much an introduction to us and also to Gen Z. But really, these are some of the guidelines, the kind guidelines that boosts performance through a trust-based approach. So as we said, regular growth-focused check-ins that aren't so much an interrogation or an audit of how well that person's doing, but very much a space to garner responsiveness, exploring room for improvement, and very much offering the support-based approach, which is how can we support you? What do you feel you're not being supported in? What is it that we can do from our side? And what is it that you think that you can do, self-reflection, to bring us into union and into cooperation, rather than the employee feeling as if they have to measure up to the almost impossible and ever-changing standards of organizations and their senior personnel. So, and one of the ways that we do this is we call them strategy sessions rather than compliance checklists. So your employees are organizational assets. They are your mentees. And how can we together create a strategy between us that can facilitate their growth and then the growth of their team and then the growth of the organization altogether? So, and this is what we've come up with. So in order to help you frame the performance review, because we've talked a lot about the concept, we've talked about why it works, and also a little bit about how, but how can we structure this? So number one, contribution. Ask them what they feel they delivered on or meaningfully contributed to. Because remember, people don't want to just be administering results. They want to be part of contribution. They want to be able to give something interesting, unique, and special to the organization. That is the key to engagement. And one of the questions you can ask is, what in this quarter, what outcome are you proud of? What is it that gave you a feeling or an experience of self-growth, of achievement? Collaboration. We want to make sure that employees are not just good on their own, but they contribute as part of the overall ecosystem. How many times have we come across fantastic employees who do very well independently, but may not be the most healthy counterparts in a team dynamic? A lot of the time, it may be because we haven't given them the support to integrate into that team effectively. Maybe there are underlying team dynamics that are creating a toxic community environment. And this is how you get those insights. It's not just so much about the individual before you. You're also getting a snapshot of the organization. And you can only do that when you come from a place of kindness, when you come from a place of cooperation, rather than as a checklist of compliance. So one of the questions you can ask is, who did you support or learn from recently? And then we've got creativity. How do you approach problems with fresh thinking? Now, Gen Z, we are misunderstood and we are misaligned. And a lot of the time we're seen as difficult because we are living in one of the most difficult eras of humanity. We have to essentially show as potential employees and as retained employees that we are better than AI, that we are better than the answers that we can get from ChatGPT. And therefore, one of the ways that you can sustain the relevance of having human employees is by investing and encouraging their creativity, something that AI hasn't quite gotten to yet. And that is how you leverage human talent and therefore Gen Z talent in your organization. So you can ask, what new idea or method did you explore? What barriers are there to your creativity? Because that is going to be the golden nugget that will set apart organizations that thrive, stay afloat, or are removed from the equation altogether. And a lot of the time we spend our time fighting Gen Z, when actually they are the human synthesizers of a world seeking connection. So they're very much interested in emotional intelligence and self-intelligence and self-growth. But at the same time, they're navigating a world that is becoming more and more dependent on bots. This is an organizational asset that's right in front of you. Invest in their creativity, invest in their ability to think deeply, and then you will create an organization that stands shoulder to shoulder to the AI, or to the perceived AI threat. So why does this model work? So aside from productivity and profitability, this will boost retention not only in the short term, but in the long term. Employee morale. I spoke to a technology giant recently who we signed with in Germany, and they said the biggest thing that is keeping them from their performance outcomes is because their employees are debilitated and crippled by the fear that AI is going to take over their jobs. And this is the time for us to leverage our humanity, not to move away from it, not to decrease it, in order to retain our staff, in order to give them the opportunity to grow and not feel like there's no point anymore. There are better frameworks, they can be replaced. There isn't space for them. The more trust we give them, the more we leverage human excellence and therefore Gen Z excellence in an age of AI, in a business world that is becoming more and more competitive and more fractured. And of course, it aligns with the values of current and future talent. Gen Z today are completely different in terms of their desires, their beliefs, and what they value to Gen X, the millennials, and baby boomers. When you put trust at the heart of your organization, not only do you attract Gen Z, but you attract the very best of Gen Z talent. And since we are going to be the dominant workplace population by 2040, it's high time that companies start listening to us rather than fighting the concept of us having too high of expectations. Absolutely not. Gen Z are teaching us that the status quo no longer works. And to be honest, it never really did. So I won't quote any more of the statistics. I think I've given you enough for today. So with all of that in mind, with the frameworks that we have provided as part of the ROK framework, and some of the ideas and the way that we've opened up the space to understand Gen Z, not from a place of distant curiosity, but from a place of understanding the priorities that we have, the experiences that we've had, and the way that we've learned from previous generations. For those who are leading their own organizations, their own practices, this is a reflective activity that can help you self-audit where you are in your current position and how you can increase your capacity to retain and sustain Gen Z talent and maximize that talent as well. So this is a very quick audit, and it serves to be self-exploratory and rather than requiring you to provide robust answers. So number one, some considerations. Gen Z members or any of our employees have flexibility in how, when, and where they work. Is that rarely true, somewhat true, consistently true? Think about how that would work for you. Would that work for you? Is it a mindset block? Is it a structural requirement? What is it? These are some of the ways that you can consider how you can increase your capacity and increase your attractiveness for Gen Z talent retention. My feedback style as a manager, as a leader, as a coach invites open dialogue, not defensiveness. What are you inspiring? Are you inspiring retreat, or are you inspiring growth and contribution? At the heart of every employee, I always say, whether they're a baby boomer, whether they are Gen X, whether they're millennial, and especially Gen Z, everyone wants to contribute. Everyone has something to contribute within themselves. But a lot of the time, we go into organizations and we feel stripped of our voice, of our identity. And a lot of the time we are penalized for what we don't do, but we are hardly appreciated for what we do. So when we do something that could be better, is that going to invite growth and change? Or is that going to help make us recede into ourselves and stop trying altogether? Number 3, delegated tasks reflect each person's strengths and growth goals. Now, Harvard came out with an article recently, and I absolutely loved it. And it said, we are going to have to create flexible job roles in the future, which means that when you're recruited as, let's say, as an administrator, that is going to limit you to the job role and the responsibilities of the concept of an administrator. But what if you, as a Gen Z person, have hidden talents, have these abilities to contribute beyond your role and responsibility? Will you be shot down? Will you be encouraged? Is there space in an organization? Consider that. And of course, are mistakes framed as learning moments or performance flaws? How much grace are we giving people, especially in the early stages of their career, to learn, or we're merely setting them out or calling them out as incompetent without considering, are we giving the support? Are we giving the trust? Are we giving the opportunity to grow? And is inclusion visible in behavior? Let's say a neurodivergent person. I'll put out a very difficult scenario for you to think about, and I'll invite your answers at the end because we are going a little bit faster than anticipated, so we have more space for questions. But if a neurodivergent person is fantastic at creative tasks, but is not so fast in admin work because that's not their speciality, how will you as a leader deal with that? How inclusive and accepting or understanding are you of that specific disposition? And how does your leadership behavior through trust and through kindness and through enabling growth enable for inclusion, for accommodation? How are you going to deal with that scenario? And remember that the global rates or the global levels of neurodiversity are increasing. Gen Z as a whole are more likely to be diagnosed neurodiverse than any other generation before us. How are you going to handle that? How is your leadership behavior going to portray what you have written as a value system on your website, in your brochure, in your brand identity? So just some things to think about. And then we've got this. Now, I hope we've had space to reflect. I hope we've had space to consider where we can introduce some trust, some opportunities, some playful piloting in trust-based leadership, whether it's through performance reviews, whether it's through flexible work patterns. I want you to consider if you are able to, or if you feel ready. If not, that's okay. But something that you have found during our time together, a commitment, a micro realization, something that can help you build more trust that you found through the insights that's been shared today. So you can either do that in the chat or you can share that later on at the end where there's questions and answers and some insight sharing. But today, from the insights that we've shared today, from the time that we've spent together, to build more trust, what will you do? What eureka moment have you had? What small moment of realization have you had that will inspire you not to take on trust fully? Because of course, that's a mammoth task. And sometimes it may not be feasible or strategically sane. But what can you start to do today? What small practice can you at least consider to build more trust into your organization, to build more trust among your team members? And more importantly, because trust is an inner job, it's an inside job. How can you build more trust today? So the key takeaways that we have explored today is that really Gen Z are not demanding too much. Perhaps they're demanding what every other generation before them have been silent on, have complied with, or haven't perhaps even had the knowledge to access that there is a better way of doing work, that work should not be what I call a humiliation ritual. It should not be a place where yourself or your personhood comes to die. It should not be a place that doesn't consider or doesn't even perhaps invite the creative, non-traditional, non-work aspects of you. Maybe what Gen Z are doing are finally inspiring the business world to loosen its tight grip of status quo practices, which, if you don't take it from Gen Z, you might be more convinced by the statistics that we've explored today that show that productivity is not linear, creativity is not linear. Flexibility can save you money. Flexibility can increase your productivity. Flexibility can make you more profitable. Loosening our grip may create an entirely new strategy and bring in the best of people towards us. And of course, with that in mind, we must remember that more than anything, Gen Z needs purpose, spaces and arenas of learning and growth and development, clarity and trust. Will you do what you say that you do? Will you invite growth rather than merely penalize? And very much trust. And trust is not about letting loose and telling your employees, you can do what you like. It's inviting the opportunity for people to show who they are. And that is what really trust is about, giving people the opportunity to demonstrate and to show their true selves and show their most complete selves. Because then what that does is it helps organizations see whether they are a good fit, and also employees to see if they are a good fit for that company too. And we don't get there when we are performing. We don't get there when we're micromanaging, and we don't get there when we see employees not as human beings, but as units to be controlled, to be surveyed, and to be monitored. It doesn't work. And of course, that performance reviews should reward impact and inspire growth. Now, there's a fantastic saying is that the person who does more for less pay will end up being the one who gets more for doing less in the end. And that means that when you inspire employees towards excellence, towards growth, they end up going above and beyond the limited roles and responsibilities that have been drafted in their employee contract to begin with. But if we penalize, if we don't extend trust, if we have such a tight grip and we have such a fearful approach to their ability to do the job, guess what? The self-trust erodes and they end up either disengaging, quiet quitting, or leaving altogether. And of course, flexibility is structural kindness that drives performance. Kindness is about giving people the opportunity to be seen, the opportunity to contribute, and then maneuvering accordingly. Because I'm pretty sure that maybe some of the questions that I'll have is, what if someone, you give them all the time in the world, you give them all the support, and they're still not performing? Well, at least you know that you have given the right opportunity and the ample opportunity for employees to prove themselves. At the moment, we don't have that. So we have to get to that in order to have those conversations. And of course, trust-based leadership is retention. As a high-functioning, high-performing employee who worked in law, education, mental health, and consulting, the one thing that made me leave was not because I was incompetent, not because I didn't think that the job was suitable for me, but it was the micromanagement, it was the lack of trust culture, and it was the fact that we were required to transform into someone else in order to do our job. And how many high-performing employees have left due to similar circumstances? So thank you so much for having me. And it's been an honor to talk about trust-based leadership from the eyes of a Gen Z founder and as someone who works with clients on a daily, regular basis. and how we can not only retain Gen Z, but maximize the talents of a very multidimensional, unique generation that once truly understood and appreciated will make the necessary change, the necessary shift in the business environment that has been a long time coming. And I invite any questions that you may have.
Wow, Meryl, that was fantastic. It was so well structured, and the entire content was very, very well put. So I do have a question, and that is, now it could be stereotyping, it could be, but I would love to hear your perspective. And that is, it seems like, okay, when you said, we are memes and you monetize so many things. Um, so what it appears to us, okay, is that Gen Z wants ratification and appreciation constantly. It's because like the Facebook thumbs up, how many likes? Oh, it's half an hour and I haven't got more than 15 likes. Oh, it's like almost like the end of the world. Instant ratification. And in the corporate environment, what we find is that there is a learning curve. There are things, but somewhere Gen Z seems to be instant Maggie. I want this immediately. What And there are certain things, yes, it's nice to be aspirational, but how would you look at these two aspects and what would be your perspectives?
Thank you, Sushma. I love that. And I think we also have to get real and honest about some of the parenting behaviors and some of the childhood experiences that Gen Z have experienced. And they are in a dopamine rushed environment where instant gratification and instant affirmation is a massive part of our psychological profile. And of course, it's just not possible. But what we're not getting at the moment is communication between multi-generational teams, because Gen Z are seeing it from one perspective and generations are seeing it from a different perspective. This is a space where Gen Z can essentially be reparented through collaborative education by listening to each other. Because I think what Gen Z have gotten too much of is what their parents had too little of. And when we bring that communication together, we can find a way of, okay, where can Gen Z come into a place of humility? And where can other generations who have perhaps experienced almost zero affirmation, how can they dial up? So Gen Z have to dial down, and other generations have to dial up. But you're absolutely right. And I always say to Gen Z employees as well, I say that social media is not real. The world of instant gratification is not real. But there is a nugget that we can bring, which is that for a long time in workplaces, we haven't been appreciated. When we've done something wrong, we've had bricks fall onto our heads, absolutely. But we just haven't had appreciation. So our parents thought, right, we're going to over appreciate you. So when Gen Z came in, they said, I am only going to be appreciated and you better appreciate me for everything. So there is a way that we can learn from each other and come into a reasonable space of equilibrium. At the moment, we're not facing each other. The moment we face each other, that's when we can start having those conversations and managing expectations from both sides. So dial in and dial up. But really, Sushma, it's a parenting problem that we have. Gentle parenting gone mad. Too much appreciation too early. How can we scale that with accountability, but also, feed the fact that we do need appreciation in our workplaces, but it's a two-way street and it's a parenting phenomena that has now fallen into the workplace. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you. That was a wonderful answer. It's given me a different perspective, and I shall take that forward. Give me clarity. I've been thinking about it for numerous months. Thanks. Thanks. Fantastic.
Thank you so much. Any other
Thank you,
questions about
Sushma.
us?
Any other questions?
Meghna, I wondered if you had a question at all.
I'm living with one. I don't need questions.
No problem at all.
Vanita, you want to take
I
over?
have a question, Meryl.
Hmm.
Simple
Yes,
question. It's to the organization and to the parenting both. See, the Gen Z, how can we support Gen Z when they ignore the past experience and the regulation rules, let it be at the office or the home, but later they face challenges and realize those lessons were valuable. After
Mm,
facing the problems, they come back. How do we teach them? How do we make them understand that the with polite way that how to learn from, because they don't want to listen to the past experience, the others example at all. They don't
mm,
want to listen to other example. Don't they say like don't relate me to this person, don't relate me to that person. I don't want this regulation, rules and regulations. I don't want
mm,
this businessman example. I don't
mm.
want this educator example. But later they come back for certain reason. They come back and say, "Oh, this was wrong." But how do we explain them politely? How to explain them? How to make them understand? Did you get the question?
Yes, I did. And it's a fantastic one. And I love that there is a parenting social element. There's a
In
psychological,
organization as well as in the parenting, anywhere.
yeah, in
Mm.
all of that. So this again, similar to the answer that I gave to the lovely Sushma. Essentially, again, Gen Z are so a lot of the time they're blocked out from advice because the advice that has been given has been instructional. It has a lot of the time it's been dictatorial.
They don't need advice letter at all. They don't need advice at all in their life.
Yes, that's the belief that they can do things in their own way and that there is this high level of personhood that they have to sustain. And what I talked about trust-based leadership from the non-Gen Z responsibility, but it's also about creating opportunities for self-reflection and delivering and portraying information in an objective, reflective manner, rather than a way that is intrusive or obstructive. And of course, this is where training comes in. And a lot of the time, the training that we provide is much more of this is how you do it. It's in a box and it doesn't inspire that much self-reflection or self-work. That is the language of Gen Z. They believe that they don't want to be dictated at, so they're going to create their own way of thinking. And a lot of the time, then that what happens is they experience those mistakes and then they come back and say, oh, I think you're right. So I think it's two things. Number one, it's about a lot more self-reflective and cooperative training that helps them understand what's expected of them in a way that centers their experiences and their self-direction at the heart of it. And at the same time, through that space, there has to be a strategy involved that tells them that this is what is expected, this is the philosophy behind it, and this is what you're going to get as a result of your, not your compliance, but as a result of you going along with this philosophy. This is what it is. This is where it can help you. And this is how we can explore that through self-reflection. Now, a lot of the time, but when I say this, it might seem very common sense, but we're just not doing that. The moment that we enter a lot of workplaces, I'm sure that the ones that I'm talking to today are not like that, but a lot of it is sort of like boxed training packages that are not so much, they don't give you that much chance to relate it to you. They're not self-reflective, they're not tailored, they're not personality driven. They're a one-size-fits-all approach. So when we have seen that time and time again, we recede back into the idea of, no, I know what's best for me because I've been told my entire life what is best for me. So, but we have to give that space for self-reflection. We have to tell them the philosophy and the understanding behind it. And we also need to give room for maneuver or for mistake creation. But the important thing is that we dial and we essentially create training programs that bring about self-reflection, bring about a relationship back to the self in a way that relates to them. And really with Gen Z, it's about an interesting balance between giving personal autonomy, but also being realistic, because Gen Z also have to come out of the social media bubble that the world is not a fantasy, that there are requirements, there are things that are needed in order to function in the world or be a part of an organization. And the reason I say it's common sense is because even though it sounds good to you and I, many organizations are not doing that. They're not creating that space for self-reflection. They're not creating that space for self-growth. Let's try it. And if it still doesn't work, then of course that means that there is something far more underlying there. And it is the fact that that person may not be a suitable person for that organization. But let's start with self-reflection. Let's start with flexibility. Let's start with a bit of trust, as well as a strategic and clear guideline of what is expected of them. Many of the workplaces I've worked at had a lot of unspoken rules, unspoken expectations. And when I didn't fall exactly into those, there was a lot of uproar from the other side. So that's what we're experiencing in the UK, at least. And that's what the client feedback is that we've gotten, is that when we've created that space for self-reflection, for more tailored and more interactive and more critical thinking training sessions, we have had Gen Z align with us and break that barrier in between. But we have to start with that to begin with, which we don't have. So I hope that
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
a big
I understood,
question.
and I think we should, our generation should move one step further to handle the Gen Z. This is
Yeah.
what I have understood from my
Better
experience.
to stop telling them anything, advising them anything. Just
Advising them, yes.
let them face it, and they will learn.
Absolutely. And speak from a place of objectivity, and speak from a place of you have the option.
Trust
But this is the reality. And I think that they like the clarity. They like to be given the full picture with responsibility for themselves, because ultimately, you know, that the reality is it is their choice. Will they take it, whether they don't? And all we can do is facilitate and give them enough trust to see it through.
Trust and appreciation is much needed to the Gen Z this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Shushma.
Yeah. So another question on this itself, when you said the social media bubble and the parenting and everything related. So how does Gen Z view relationships? How is it different from our generation?
Sushma, can I ask, are you talking about business relationships, or are you talking about personal relationships, or both?
Personal relationships, and also loyalty from a business angle, loyalty to a company. You know, one is because if you're always on your mobile or gadgets, what type of human to human connect are they really getting?
That's a great question. I think for time purposes, because we're exploring the universe of the Gen Z prototype and the personality. Gen Z statistically have the lowest levels of organizational loyalty in the history of workers. Why? Because they are coming from a place of not resentment, but from the experiences of their parents, where their parents have been loyal to an organization for 30, 40 years. And then they have ended up being cast out in a day and replaced as if they haven't mattered. So they come from almost this rebellious, I will not be a slave to a company, I will have my own life. But what that is doing is it means that they are perhaps under investing in their work relationships and under investing in their personal relationships. Because, and I don't know, Sushma, if yourself or others are familiar, I'm sure you are, with attachment styles. Yes. So consider Gen Z the fearful avoidant of attachment styles at work. They want to contribute, They want to invest, but they have this history of organizational struggles and trauma that they have grown up with, that they have experienced. I experience it, where they think we have given our heart and soul to organizations. We've received so little. And if you extend that into, for example, their relationships, ghosting, where you go on a date and then you get ghosted, or cheating that has become such a big phenomena. We are aching for connection. We want to contribute. But if the environment that we are in, for example, does not reward loyalty, if the organization is ultimately thinking about their money, is ultimately thinking about their output, is ultimately thinking about who can they replace because this person doesn't seem to be doing so well. They're at 99% productivity, not 100. And also the relationships that we are, the norms that we are being fed. We are in this longing for healthy environments that we can work in, but we need more of them to soothe the trust, to soothe the desire for Gen Z to contribute. And it's heartbreaking. We're very misunderstood. And I'll speak from a personal perspective. The reason I left 9 to 5 was because I found it very, very toxic, intolerable. Bullying and narcissism is the norm. And that's because perhaps in the previous generations, psychological education was underinvested in. Now we are overinvested in. So it's about coming towards that place, seeing more kindness-led organizations, seeing more investment from organizations, well-established organizations in psychological safety, trust, soothing the woes and the fears of Gen Z, and also inspiring them in turn to invest as well. We all have to come into the equilibrium.
Once again, thank you so much. Lovely answer.
We have
Thank
just 2 minutes to go. Prasanna, just a quick question. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, right. Thank you very much. Okay, though I switch on my camera, you cannot see me. I have a power disruption here, right? I have a small question. I should apologize first. As I join after a couple of minutes to the session, I don't know whether you have been covered this thing. In my readings, I have come across different definition for the Gen Z. In some reports, it has mentioned it is not demarcated by date of birth. It is a psychographic group. It has been done by a UK organization, a research institute. I have that report as well. And some reports are telling 80% of millennials belong to Gen Z. So I just need to understand clearly, okay, what is the definition for Gen Z? Is it going to be demarcated for the date of birth like previous generation? Or the report I referred, it says, okay, sometimes myself also belong to Gen Z, because it's having some common 8 C's connected, something like that. I can remember everything. It's referred as YouTube generation. Okay, I really want to understand what is the clear definition for that.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic question. I think in many ways you can say that we are all Gen Z because we are all part of the internet, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook generation. And I think that, that it comes back to perception. I think objectively, Gen Z is marked as any other generation. So it's anyone from 1997 up until 2009 or 2010. Now it swings between 2008 to 2010. Different academic articles and entities will put the stop somewhere between 2008 to 2010 from 1997, so in between those. But I love that you mentioned about the idea of the psychosocial profile of Gen Z. Now, for me, even though I am Gen Z, I relate a lot to millennial culture because that was how I grew up. That was the music, that was the trends, that was the culture in which I grew up in. So according to that, and I completely agree, and I would say to your question, to answer it simply, I think it would be both. We all have elements of Gen Z. For example, the struggle with loneliness. The more we are on this, the less we have heart to heart. Or the struggle that we have in terms of human skills. The more we are in our own worlds, in our own lives, the more we prioritize ourselves. perhaps we're not prioritizing the community. So in terms of our struggles, many of us from other generations share Gen Z struggles, whether it's, for example, AI automation anxiety, not wanting to have children, which seems to be a big part of the Gen Z psychosocial profile, a lack of connection, high mental health crisis. Now, I'm Afghan and Uzbek, and my parents had a fantastic social life because their culture brought them up in that way. I do not. Now, many of us are lonely. Many of us are individuals or individualistic. You could also say that that is part of the psychological profile of Gen Z. But I think if we were to make it as objective as possible, I do think that the age mark helps us understand that actually, inevitably, if you were born in 2000 and you're 25, the life that you have, the culture that you have, the experiences that you have is going to be shaped by the technological and social changes that happened within that period of time. But of course, you can extend that philosophically and say, we're all kind of Gen Z. We're all a bit lonely. We're all a bit addicted to our phones. We're all looking for something greater. We're all looking for something more than statistics and facts. We want something organic. We want the beatific. And we all want more from work. Maybe that's what makes us all Gen Z. So I hope that answered your question. And I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Yes, now I can understand how I can relate it to this. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Meryl. Thanks so much for wonderful session that you gave us, and a lot of data, and you actually opened up minds and broader thinking towards Gen Z. Thanks so much for coming and giving us your time. Hope to see you back